Last Sam's Cage by David A. Poulsen, Chapter 19, page 211. When Eddie woke up, he was lying in the same position as when he'd passed out, but it was different now. He was in a bed, a clean bed with white sheets and pillowcases. In fact, the whole place was clean. He tried to roll over, but it hurt too much. He moved his eyes as far as they would go to the left and then to the right, but all he got was floor in one direction and ceiling in the other. "I see you've decided to join us," a pleasant female voice said. The voice came from behind him. Eddie knew where he was now, or at least he thought he did. "Is this a hospital?" "Clinic," came after the answer from the same voice. "Like a hospital, only smaller. How are you feeling?" "Okay," Eddie said. "How did I get here?" "Your dad brought you." "Where is he?" "My dad?" Eddie's throat hurt to talk. He wasn't sure why that was. He didn't remember getting kicked or punched anywhere around his neck, maybe on top of everything else. He was getting a cold. He almost smiled at the thought. "I'm here, kid. Right here." Jack came around in front of Eddie and sat down on the chair next to the window. Eddie remembered it all, right up until the moment he passed out. He could recall perfectly every detail, but what had happened after that, he wanted to ask Jack. But he didn't think that it was a good time with the nurse, if that's what she was in the room. "It's daylight," Eddie said. "I must have been out a long time." Jack smiled at him. "You missed all of last night and most of today." "How soon can I get out of here?" "You've got a couple of cracked ribs, your knee is swelled up like a pumpkin, and you've got some bumps and bruises. They tell me we should be able to get you out of here in a couple of days. They need to make sure there isn't any other damage to your insides first." The woman's voice spoke again. "If you don't need anything right now, I'll leave you two to talk, but not too long. The more rest he gets, the quicker he'll recover." Eddie waited until he heard the sound of the woman's footsteps fading before he turned his eyes to look at Jack. "What were you doing there, at Last Sam's Cage?" Jack looked down at his hands. "It doesn't matter. Why don't we just forget about it?" Eddie shook his head. "No, it does matter. I want to know." Jack looked at him, nodded a little. "I'd seen that guy, not the one you call Stink, the other one, following you a while back. He did a pretty good job of staying out of sight, but I happened to spot him. He followed you until you got to Dinny, then he left. I thought about going after him, then I didn't. Guess I should have." Eddie watched Jack's eyes. They were soft now, so different from what Eddie had seen only hours before. "The more I thought about it," Jack went on, "the more I thought he might be out to cause you some grief. He looked like the type that might want to do that. I decided I'd better see if I could prevent that from happening. So I've been watching you ever since. He followed you, just at night. I didn't figure he'd try anything during the day." "You were at the playground all day, and then you watched over me at night?" "Something like that, yeah." There was no emotion in Jack's voice. It was as if all the emotion had been spent in Last Sam's Cage. Jack had saved Eddie's life, but he talked about it now like he was describing a drive in the country. Eddie knew there was no point in asking what had happened after he passed out. Jack Sim wouldn't say, and maybe that was better. Didn't you have to fill out forms to get me in here?" "Yeah, that's when I told them you were my kid. I figured that might be the best way to go. You didn't have any ID on you, so nobody knows any different so far. I don't know how long we're going to get by without a health card, but so far so good." How do they think I got like this? Eddie asked. He knew that there would be probably some suspicion that Jack had hurt him. I told them you were in a fight, got jumped by two punks, some kind of school feud. Eddie nodded. Not a bad story. Part of it was even true. Have you told anybody else I'm here? Jack leaned back in the chair. I figure it's up to you to let your mother know what's going on when you're ready. Eddie didn't say anything. He didn't have an answer to that, at least not yet. You want anything? Water or anything? Jack asked him. Eddie tried to look at his watch, but it was gone. The time? He said. What? Jack turned his eyes back to Eddie. What time is it? Jack looked at his watch. A little after 3 o'clock. Can you help me turn over to my back? Eddie asked. I'm getting stiff and I don't think I can roll over by myself. Sure, kid. Jack stood up and eased an arm behind Eddie's back. Okay, I've got you. Now nice and slow. The turn wasn't that bad. It hadn't hurt as much as Eddie had thought it would. Jack straightened up and stood beside Eddie's bed. Eddie turned his head to look at him. 3 o'clock, he repeated. Yeah, maybe a few minutes after. How come you're not at the playground? You're always there at this time. The zoo doesn't close for another couple of hours. Jack took a long time to answer. When he did, the beginning of a smile played on the corners of his mouth. I guess I won't be doing that anymore. You won't be watching the kids at the playground anymore? No. The smile got a little bigger. It wasn't a grin. Eddie couldn't imagine that face ever grinning, but for Jack Sim, it was pretty major smile. Jack brushed an imaginary crumb off his shirt. I don't have to do that anymore. I mean, it's not like I evened the score. Nothing could do that. But I always said, if you only I could save one kid from something like what happened to Angela, maybe I could. His voice broke as he said his sister's name and brushed again at the front of his shirt. Yeah, Eddie said. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Eddie stared up at the ceiling. You'll think you'll ever go back there? To the zoo, I mean? I don't think so. Jack's voice was okay again. I think it's time I saw a few other things in the world. How about you? Eddie tried to take a deep breath, but his ribs hurt too much. He took a couple of little breaths instead. When I was in that cage and Stink Pigler was kicking me, and I was sure I was going to die, right in the middle of the pain and everything, I had this one thought. I remember thinking just for a second that the crappy part about dying right then was not ever going home again. I think maybe once I'm healed up and stuff, I might, just go home. Jack Sim put his hand on Eddie's arm. I think that's a pretty good idea.